Entrepreneurship is one of those things that if you're not careful, you'll start to unravel and you start to spiral into dark areas, especially if you are in a place right now where maybe your business is you're crushing it, especially if you're in a place right now where maybe you feel like you're going backwards. Maybe you're transitioning and you're launching a new service, a new product, or you're trying to service a different demographic and you're just thinking, what are people going to say about this? What happens if it fails? What happens if it doesn't take off the way that I thought it did? What happens if I end up losing money? I want to share with you two Bible verses that if you read them, if you study them, and most importantly, if you apply them, I believe that they'll make you a better entrepreneur overall. I know this because these are two Bible verses that spoke volumes for me. And so I want to share them with you. The first Bible verse is from Colossians 3:23, and it reads like this: whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men. This means that you're going to deal with difficult people. You're going to have assignments that you are going to run, like you're going to have for certain seasons, and you're going to do things that you may not want to do, or that you may be kind of scratching your head wondering, why am I even doing this? So the first frame on this verse is super helpful because it says, dude, you're going to do something because it pleases me, not because of an external applause, not because what she thinks of you, not because of what he says, not because of what your market is doing, but you're going to do it from your heart because like you're doing it as if it's for me. That's like that verse. That's God speaking to us from our entrepreneur seat, from the CEO seat, from the managerial seat, from the operator seat. The second piece to that verse that speaks volume is this keeps us, and I think this is probably the most important part of this, is it keeps us focused and aligned with who God is and what He's called us to do, not just in this season, but throughout our entrepreneurial journey. So when we're doing something, it's not just, oh, I'm doing this because I have to. I'm doing this because, it makes me money. I'm doing this because, this is what pays the bills. I'm doing this because this is, I guess, what, the clients want or the demographic needs. No, 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 no. You're doing this because you have an assignment on your life. And you know that, man, because I'm doing this, this is pleasing to God. Similar to even before Jesus went out and he went into the river where he was baptized by John, his cousin, right before he, or right before he went out into his first, what we call like sermon, right before he went out and he casted out the first demon, right before he went out and he preached the gospel, it says that the skies cracked open and then a voice came down from the sky and people heard it. It was God himself speaking and said, "This is my son with whom I'm well pleased." Now, the part that at least I enjoy most about that verse isn't just like the conversation happening between earth and heaven, but it's the fact that even before Jesus technically did anything, right? We're talking about before he had the wedding miracle. We're talking about before he was able to help the blind, before he was able to heal people from leprosy, before he was able to walk into the tomb where Lazarus was and say, "Lazarus, come forth." And Lazarus was no longer dead. Before any of that, he said, "This is my son with whom I'm well pleased." So this lets me know that just us having a simple obedience from in terms of a heart posture before anything physically happens in the real world, God says, "This is my son, this is my daughter. I'm freaking proud of you." And I think that that would help so many of us out viewing God of a father who's proud of us even before we hit our quarterly like earnings like reports, even before we hit our metrics, even before we hit our KPIs, even before we bring on 50 new employees into the organization, even before we just completely crush our 6-month target, whatever that is, dude, I'm proud of you. And I think that more of us, especially as entrepreneurs, we need to hear that, at least believe that more often that it comes from God than anyone else. And the reason for that is because if I'm being real with you guys, and let me know if you're like this in the comments, we are harder on ourselves than anyone else ever will be. Like you can crush a month and you'll think, yeah, dude, but there was more in the gas tank. You can make the biggest bet and it end up taking off. It's a home run. everyone's giving you like an applause of how smart you are, how great you did it. But if you don't believe that for yourself, and if you don't believe, man, this is ultimately what God wanted for my life, then you're not even going to be proud of that moment. So first off, like have that reframe for yourself and understand that God is proud of me. So that is the first piece. The last thing that I wanted to touch on with this verse was when you do something and you work heartily toward, again, this is because I'm doing this for God, for the Lord, not for man, not for others around me. It saves you from judgment and it saves you from the fear of being judged as well. So now you just think, or now you graduate from thinking, oh man, I wonder what they're going to say if this doesn't work out. I wonder what people are going to say if this does work out. I start making more money than my friends. I actually have friends that are entrepreneurs and now they're starting to make more money than me. And I kind of feel like I'm going backwards. Well, guess what? If you're right now in a spot where you're saying, dude, I mean, everything that I'm doing right now is because like this is what God wants me to do. I'm in the right season. I'm in the right seat. Then you shouldn't fret because there's two wills that happens at the same time. You have your will, but then you have God's perfect will. And a lot of times we end up misconstruing, well, wait a minute, I have free will, so I can technically do whatever I want. That is true, but we also have to remember what Apostle Paul says. Like, I can do anything I want, but not everything is beneficial. So that means that there is a cost for me to even follow my own free will. So that means that my own free will, although I know I could do anything I want, I have to put it to the side and I say, wait a minute, but there's a better will, which is God's will for my life that starts to like run over your will in tandem, even though you're still in charge of your decisions that you're making day in, day out in your business. But then you have the ultimate CEO, which is guiding you through the entire process of saying, hey, maybe right now it's not the right time to maybe launch that product. Hey, maybe right now it's not the right time to go out and make that hire. Or hey, maybe you've been waiting a little bit too long to go out and ask for help. Hey, maybe you've been waiting a little bit too long to go out and like start putting yourself out there in the marketplace because I've equipped you for a time such as this. The next verse, which is the second and final one that I have for us today, is Mark 2:27. And it reads something like this: the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. By the way, if you're reading this, this is Jesus saying this. And so anytime you see red letters, maybe our ears should perk up a little bit more because it's like the guy himself preaching to us and letting us know, I want you to take heed and pay attention to what I'm about to share with you. I want to swap out the word Sabbath because depending on where you are in your maybe Christian journey as an entrepreneur, maybe you're just coming across this word for the first time, and I'm going to replace it with the word rest, which is which is what it means. So back when this was written, Jesus was being asked about the Sabbath and hey, should we actually rest? And what's the importance of rest, or what's the importance of the Sabbath? And should we just have a Sabbath? And if I don't follow, like what happens? And so the Sabbath for the Jews in that era was a day of rest. It came from Genesis 1, where it says that God worked for 6 days, and on the seventh day, he had a Sabbath, which is he rested. And so let's swap out the word Sabbath, and then let's reread that verse, and it goes something like this: you don't live to rest, you rest to live. That's like the frame that I have around like that spoke to me with this verse. And here's why. A lot of us feel guilty because we rest. But if we look at that verse, it actually says that the rest was created for us. So if something is created for you, that means that it is a gift given to you by God. Rest is a gift. Rest is meant to be enjoyed. And if we're being honest, entrepreneurs have a hard time resting because our minds are always running at 100 miles an hour. So I can speak firsthand from this for a long time. I mean, sometimes I still catch myself. I'll be resting and it'll be just like my time to kind of just hang out and not think too much about what's happening in the business, not think too much about, hey, we could have done this or we could have done that better. Because there's a time and place for it. Don't get me wrong. Like when we're working, we are locked in and we're working, we're servicing our clients and we're working on the media and we're putting out content like this more on the other business channel that we have. But when we're not, I've learned to like really lean on God and say, okay, there's a piece in the Bible where God talks about his supernatural rest that you can't necessarily get it from sleep. You can't just get it from nutrition. And it's like a peace that goes beyond all understanding. And so I started thinking to myself, why has this been so hard to access? And then I had like this epiphany of like, oh, the reason why it's been so hard to access is because I've felt guilty about resting. And when would you feel guilty about a gift that God's given you other than maybe the way that you've been utilizing the gift hasn't been for or hasn't been in its original intent for how he wanted it to be used. And so I started wondering, okay, well, what exactly am I doing on my Sabbath? Like, am I giving my time back to my family? Because that's my first ministry. Am I giving my time back to the local church? Am I giving my time back to, getting myself back into the word, getting myself back into communication with God, communion with God? Because that's ultimately, if we're honest here, that's what the Sabbath should be. It should be getting me closer to God. If the answer is I'm just kind of like just moping around, not really doing much, I'm kind of resting, but then I'm really like my mind is really in the business, or my mind is actually in the problems that we just had this week, like all the fires that need to be put out, then that's not a full Sabbath. That's not a full rest. And so remember, Sabbath was made for man, man, not a man, not made for Sabbath. We get it misconstrued and we have it the other way around.